What would you do if you paid for a first-class seat, but someone in uniform looked you in the eye and said, "People like you don't belong here"? Would you stay silent and move to the back? Or would you sit still, risking humiliation in front of dozens of strangers and thousands more watching online? On Flight 618, a storm began with just one sentence. Nathaniel Carter, a man dressed in a tailored suit, a briefcase at his feet, was told he was a fraud. A ticket scanner beeped green. Passengers whispered in disbelief. Phones went live, but still, the accusations grew sharper. What no one knew in that moment was that the man being doubted was not just another passenger. He was the CEO of the very company that kept Pacific Skies airplanes safe in the air. This is a story of prejudice and power, of quiet strength that turned into thunder at 30,000 feet. A story that asks one haunting question: how much is dignity worth stay with us? Like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe to the channel, because what happened next changed aviation forever. The cabin lights glowed in a soft amber, throwing long shadows across the polished leather of Pacific Skies, Flight 618's first-class seats. Outside the windows, Los Angeles shimmered under a midnight haze, the runway lights twinkling like strings of scattered jewels. The world beyond was noisy and restless, but inside the cabin there was a hush, a kind of reverent quiet reserved for red-eyed travelers who hoped to trade hours of darkness for miles of progress. Nathaniel Carter eased into seat 2A with the practiced calm of a man who had spent half his adult life in the air. He loosened his tie, placed his slim silver briefcase by his feet, and leaned back into the headrest. To anyone watching, he appeared as just another business traveler impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, polished shoes, and glasses that caught the low light. But beneath the ordinary details was a man who carried entire industries on his shoulders. At 45, Nathaniel was the chief executive officer of Aerostar Systems, the company responsible for keeping the engines, avionics, and safety systems of half the nation's airlines in flawless order. His name rarely appeared in tabloids or glossy magazines. He preferred it that way. Power, he had always believed, wasn't about being seen. It was about knowing exactly when to reveal yourself and when to remain invisible. Tonight, invisibility was exactly what he craved. The day had been long, filled with meetings that stretched past sunset, and tomorrow would arrive with another storm, a 9 p.m. board presentation in New York that could determine the fate of a $900 million contract. The contract meant jobs, reputations, and the survival of an airline teetering on the edge of restructuring. Nathaniel had carried heavier burdens before, but the responsibility still sat squarely on his chest. He reached into the seat pocket and unfolded a copy of the Financial Times. His eyes lingered on a headline that read, "Airlines Face New Era of Accountability." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. The timing of the article almost felt deliberate, as if the world were whispering reminders about the very themes that shaped his life's work: accountability, equity, dignity. He tapped the edge of the paper against his knee, allowing the words to sink in. Around him, first class was sparsely populated. In seat 1C, an older man with gray hair scrolled through spreadsheets on a laptop, his face bathed in blue light. Across the aisle, a couple in their 70s murmured to each other over glasses of Chardonnay, their voices soft enough to blend with the hum of the air system. And in 3C, a young woman with curly dark hair flipped the pages of a paperback novel, occasionally glancing out the window at the blur of ground crew vehicles darting across the tarmac. It was the kind of ordinary mix Nathaniel was used to: business, leisure, solitude. There was comfort in the predictability, comfort in the rituals of flying the chime of the boarding door, the rustle of newspapers, the dull thud of overhead bins being latched shut. For Nathaniel, flights were often his only pauses. Here, 30,000 feet above the noise of daily life. He could detach, he could think clearly, he could breathe, and yet, as he stretched his legs and let out a quiet sigh, there was a familiar heaviness pressing against the peace. He had felt it many times before. The subtle, invisible weight of being watched more closely than others. The quick scans of suspicion. The unspoken questions about belonging. Nathaniel had learned long ago that no suit, no title, no resume of accomplishments could entirely shield him from the judgments that clung to the color of his skin. He shook the thought away, not wanting to let it linger. Tonight, he told himself, would be like any other. A simple flight, a few hours of rest, and then the battle of boardrooms. He turned another page of his newspaper and traced the headline with his finger, trying to bury the unease beneath familiar habits. A gentle announcement floated through the cabin speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Pacific Skies Flight 618 to New York. Please stow all carry-ons and take your seats as we prepare for departure. The captain's voice was steady, practiced, and reassuring. Nathaniel folded the newspaper neatly, placed it on the armrest, and glanced at the small clock glowing on his phone screen. Just past 11:00 p. If all went well, he would land just after sunrise, with time to shower and head directly to headquarters. He closed his eyes briefly, allowing his breathing to steady. In the rhythm of the engines, he tried to imagine himself already in New York, standing before the board, articulating strategy with clarity and calm. His mind rehearsed the cadence of his speech, the weight of the numbers, the strength of the vision. He pictured the executives nodding, the contract secured, thousands of jobs protected. For a moment, it was almost enough to drown out the tension he couldn't quite name. When Nathaniel opened his eyes, he noticed a movement at the front of the cabin. A flight attendant, tall and slender, with her hair pulled into a tight bun, moved swiftly between the rows, checking seatbelts and tray tables. Her name tag glinted in the light: Melissa Grant. At first, there was nothing unusual about her. She wore the same Navy uniform as her colleagues, the same pressed smile of professionalism. But as she drew closer to row 2, her stride slowed. Her gaze landed on Nathaniel, and something unspoken flickered in her eyes. He felt it instantly, the shift in energy, the subtle quickening of the air. He had seen that look countless times before, though never in this exact place, never in this precise way. It was a gaze that said more than words could, a mixture of doubt and presumption, of curiosity sharpened by suspicion. Nathaniel lowered his eyes back to his newspaper, deciding to ignore it. After all, perhaps he was imagining things. Perhaps fatigue was weaving shadows where none existed. Melissa passed by without speaking, her perfume trailing faintly behind her. Nathaniel released the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe tonight would remain calm, as he hoped. But a part of him, the part that had lived through too many of these small collisions, knew otherwise. He folded the paper, rested his hands on his lap, and told himself again, "Stay patient, stay steady, outside." The jet bridge pulled away from the aircraft with a dull metallic groan. The cabin doors locked with a heavy thud, and in seat 2A, Nathaniel Carter sat composed, unaware that in less than an hour, this flight would stop being a routine journey and transform into a stage where dignity, prejudice, and power would clash in ways that no one on board would forget. The engines outside hummed low as the aircraft continued boarding, a sound like a giant heart preparing itself for the long night ahead. The aisle lights glowed faintly, a runway within a runway, guiding the last passengers toward their seats. For a few precious minutes, Nathaniel Carter allowed himself to believe the tension he had felt earlier was just imagination. He kept his gaze on the folded newspaper, smoothing the edges with absent-minded precision, a ritual he used whenever he wanted to steady his nerves. But the illusion did not last. Melissa Grant returned from the front of the cabin, her steps measured, her posture erect. She carried nothing in her hands, yet her presence felt weighted, as though she were bringing something invisible but heavy into the space. She stopped beside his row and leaned slightly, her eyes fixed on him with the same flicker of suspicion he had sensed before. "Sir, may I see your boarding pass again?" she asked. The words were polite enough on the surface, but her tone carried an edge, sharp as glass. Nathaniel looked up slowly, meeting her eyes. There was no warmth in them, no trace of the professional courtesy he had seen extended to other passengers. He reached calmly into the pocket of his suit jacket and retrieved his phone, tapping the screen to reveal the digital pass. He held it out without hesitation. Melissa took the phone and studied it as though it were a counterfeit bill. Her eyes moved over the barcode, then back to him, then to the seat number glowing on the screen. A faint crease appeared between her brows. "This doesn't look right," she murmured, half to herself but loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Where did you get this ticket?" Nathaniel's voice remained even. From the Pacific Skies app, same way as everyone else. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I see. And you believe this seat is yours." "I don't believe," Nathaniel said softly. "I know. It is mine." Seat 2A. The passengers in row 1 shifted uneasily. The man with the laptop glanced up, his fingers pausing above the keyboard. The elderly couple stopped their quiet conversation, their wine glasses frozen mid-air. Even the hum of the air system seemed louder in the silence that followed. Melissa handed back the phone but did not step away. Instead, she crossed her arms and tilted her head, her voice dropping in volume yet gaining in sharpness. "Sir, the seat isn't meant for you. It's reserved for regulars." The words were casual enough to an untrained ear, but the emphasis was unmistakable. Not meant for you. Regulars. Nathaniel felt the sting instantly, though his face betrayed nothing. He had grown accustomed to the coded language, the phrases that carried centuries of exclusion in only a few syllables. He placed the phone calmly back in his pocket and gave a small nod. "I am a regular. More than 800 flights with this airline alone." Melissa's eyes narrowed. She tapped the edge of the seat back as though considering something. "Still, something about this doesn't feel right. People sometimes try to move themselves into seats they didn't purchase. I'm sure you understand. We need to be cautious." A rustle moved through the cabin, like wind through dry leaves. A young woman in 3C lowered her book, watching intently now. A few seats back, a phone screen glowed as someone pretended to scroll, but angled the camera just slightly toward them. Nathaniel felt the weight of every gaze. His pulse quickened. though his voice did not rise. The scanner validated my pass. That should be enough. Melissa's smile was thin, almost mocking. Scanners make mistakes. They're not perfect. And frankly, you don't look like our usual first-class passenger. The phrase landed heavy, like a stone dropped into still water. People like you, not the usual kind. The passengers did not speak, but their silence was charged, almost electric. Nathaniel inhaled slowly through his nose. For a moment, he considered simply standing, letting her have her way, avoiding the spectacle. It would be easier. No confrontation, no whispers, no live streams broadcast to strangers who would dissect his every word. He could retreat to economy, sit quietly, and still make it to New York by morning. But another voice rose inside him, quiet but unyielding. If you give in now, you give in forever. Every time you look away, every time you step aside, you allow this same story to play again for someone else. His father's words echoed in his memory. Dignity is not what others grant you. It is what you refuse to surrender. Nathaniel straightened in his seat, adjusting his posture until he sat tall and firm. His eyes locked on Melissa's, his voice low but resonant. This seat was purchased lawfully. It is mine. I will not move. The simplicity of the statement struck harder than any outburst. Around them, the tension thickened. The man in 1C removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead. The elderly couple exchanged uneasy glances. Elena Morales in 3C set her book aside entirely, her hand sliding into her bag for her phone. Her instincts told her this was no ordinary disagreement over seating. Something deeper, more dangerous, was unfolding. Melissa's jaw tightened, her cheeks flushed with color. She leaned closer, lowering her voice but not enough to mask the disdain. Don't make this difficult. Security is waiting just outside the door. The words sliced through the cabin. A collective intake of breath followed. Passengers shifted in their seats. A ripple of whispers began, scattered but urgent, cameras angled higher, some subtle, others bold. Nathaniel exhaled, long and deliberate. His eyes drifted briefly to the window, where the wing gleamed under the floodlights. He thought of his daughter back home, of the lessons he had tried to teach her that calmness was strength, that storms could be weathered by steady hearts. He thought of tomorrow's meeting, of the immense stakes waiting in New York, and yet he knew, with a clarity that felt almost divine, that this was the battle that mattered most tonight. He turned back to Melissa, his gaze steady. I am sitting in the seat I paid for, and I will not move. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Even the hum of the engines seemed to fade. The cabin had transformed into something else entirely, a courtroom without walls, a stage where every passenger was both witness and judge. The atmosphere was heavy, suffocating, as though the air itself waited for the next line of dialogue to break the stalemate. Melissa's lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes flicked toward the galley, then back to him. The battle lines had been drawn, and neither side seemed willing to retreat. In seat 3C. Elena pressed her phone screen, the red circle of a live stream beginning to glow. A caption appeared across the feed, first-class passenger being harassed for his seat, 2025 and still happening. Viewers trickled in, comments appearing in real time, strangers on the internet becoming part of the unfolding drama. Nathaniel did not look at the camera. He did not raise his voice or plead for sympathy. He simply sat still, composed, unshakable. His silence itself became a weapon, stripping away the veneer of authority that Melissa clung to. The tension was unbearable now, like the charged air before a storm breaks, and though none of the passengers could know it yet, the storm that had just begun in Seat 2A would ripple far beyond the walls of Pacific Skies Flight 618. The cabin air was suddenly heavy, as if every molecule had leaned in to listen. Nathaniel Carter sat motionless, his back straight, his hands resting lightly on the leather armrests. Across from him, Melissa Grant's shoulders stiffened. The tension that stretched between them was taut, fragile, and dangerous, like the moment before glass shatters. She reached into the pocket of her apron and pulled out a small handheld scanner, its black surface gleaming under the overhead lights. Without asking permission, she held it over Nathaniel's digital pass again. A high-pitched beep echoed through the cabin. A green light flashed, confirming once more that his ticket was valid. For any reasonable person, that should have been the end of it. But Melissa's lips pressed into a hard line. She turned the device slightly, tilted her head, and spoke loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Must be a system error. The seat is reserved for regulars. People like you usually find ways to sneak into first class." The words struck the air like iron. They didn't just hang there, they reverberated, bouncing off the cabin walls and ricocheting into every listening ear. The elderly man in the row 1 froze with his headphones dangling around his neck. The couple clutched their wine glasses tighter. Elena Morales, seated in 3C, felt a chill run down her spine. Elena's phone was already recording, her live stream audience growing by the second. Comments flooded in. What did she just say? "People like you. Did I hear that right? Keep filming. This is insane." Nathaniel's chest rose and fell slowly, his breathing controlled. Inside, though, a fire burned. He had been here before. Different places, different faces, but the same insinuation, the same poisonous phrase. "People like you." It was a reminder that to some, he would never simply be a traveler, a professional, a paying customer. To some, he would always be an outsider who needed to justify his presence. A part of him wanted to speak out, to challenge her directly in the same sharp tone she had used. But another part urged restraint. Anger, he knew, was what she expected. If he gave her that, he would give her the narrative she wanted to write, the unruly passenger, the disruptive presence, the one who didn't belong. So he held back. His silence became its own kind of protest. He leaned slightly forward, met her gaze head-on, and said calmly, "The scanner confirms my seat. That is the only proof required." Melissa did not flinch. She straightened, her eyes flashing with defiance. "Scanners can be hacked. Barcodes can be copied. I've seen it happen. I know the type." The cabin erupted in whispers. The type? Did she really just say that? Elena's live stream was climbing past 300 viewers now, the chat exploding with outrage. The man in 1C shifted uncomfortably, finally speaking under his breath. "This is absurd," but his words didn't carry. They fell like a pebble into an ocean, drowned out by the mounting tide of tension. Nathaniel closed his eyes for a second. In that darkness, memories surged. He saw himself as a young consultant, questioned at hotel check-ins while colleagues walked by unbothered. He remembered the glares at luxury stores, the times his card was double-checked, the countless moments of having to prove that he belonged, each memory stacked atop the last, a lifetime of microaggressions building toward this single moment on Flight 618. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer simply tired or inconvenienced. He was resolute. He would not retreat. Melissa's voice dropped lower, though still audible to nearby rows. "Move to the back now, and I'll be lenient. If not, security comes in." The elderly man in 1D finally pulled off his glasses, his voice sharp. He already proved his ticket. Let him be. Melissa's head snapped toward him, eyes narrowing, but she said nothing. Instead, she turned back to Nathaniel, clearly waiting for compliance. Elena raised her phone higher, angling it to capture Nathaniel's calm posture and Melissa's rigid stance. The comments on her live stream scrolled faster than she could read. "Stay strong, brother. We see you. Unbelievable. 2025 and this still happens." Nathaniel tilted his head slightly, his voice carrying enough weight for all to hear. "I will not move. Call security if you must." The declaration wasn't loud, but it rang through the cabin with the resonance of a gavel striking wood. Around him, passengers shifted in their seats, torn between discomfort and admiration. The elderly couple whispered to each other, their eyes wide. The man with the laptop shut the lid, his work forgotten, and Elena felt goosebumps on her arms as she realized she was capturing a story that would travel far beyond the fuselage of this aircraft. Melissa's jaw clenched. She gave a subtle nod toward the galley. Within moments, the muffled sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the jet bridge. The announcement was clear reinforcements were on their way. Nathaniel sat still, unmoving, his eyes steady on the seat ahead. Inside, he felt the tug of conflicting emotions. A small part of him worried about escalation. What if security chose to side with Melissa? What if he was forcibly removed, humiliated on camera, his dignity stripped before strangers? But another part of him, the deeper part, whispered insistently, "This is not just about you. This is about every traveler who has been told they do not belong." He thought of his employees at Aerostar Systems, thousands of engineers, mechanics, and designers, many of them people of color who looked to him as proof that ceilings could be broken. He thought of his daughter, who had once asked him why some people seemed to question his presence in certain places. And he thought of his father's voice again, clear as day. "Never surrender your dignity." The footsteps grew louder. The jet bridge rattled as if signaling the arrival of judgment. Melissa crossed her arms, her confidence hardening, though a faint tremor in her hand betrayed the storm building inside her, too. The cabin was no longer just a cabin. It was a theater, a courtroom, a battlefield. And Nathaniel Carter, sitting quietly in seat 2A, was no longer just a passenger. He was a symbol of something much larger, though few yet realized it. Elena's live stream ticked past 1,000 viewers. Comments lit up her screen like fireworks. Systemic racism on display. "He's so calm, so composed. This woman needs to be fired." Nathaniel did not glance at the phone, did not seek validation from the outside world. His strength came from within, from decades of learning that the loudest protest was sometimes quiet resolve. Melissa adjusted her uniform, preparing to face the security team she had summoned. Her voice was steady but laced with arrogance as she addressed Nathaniel one final time. "This is your last chance to cooperate." Nathaniel lifted his head, his eyes calm but unyielding. His reply was simple, carved in stone. "I am already cooperating. I am sitting in the seat I paid for." The silence that followed was profound, as if even the aircraft itself was waiting. Outside, the dawn was just beginning to brush the horizon with pale light. Inside, in the amber glow of first class, a storm gathered that would shake not only the cabin, but an entire corporation. The sound of hurried footsteps filled the narrow jet bridge, heavy and deliberate, echoing like approaching thunder. The first-class cabin stiffened as if it knew that the arrival of authority would decide whether the storm would break wide open or quietly fade. Nathaniel Carter remained still in seat 2A, his fingers folded loosely over his lap, his expression carved from patience, though his chest held a steady fire. Melissa Grant stood near the galley, her arms folded tight, the glow of confidence sharpening her features. She looked toward the door expectantly, her chin lifted as though she were summoning an army. The curtain parted, and 2 uniformed security officers stepped in. Behind them followed Daniel Price, the flight supervisor, his weathered face lined with years of dealing with conflicts large and small. He carried himself with the weight of someone who had seen too many late-night disputes and knew that even the smallest misunderstanding could ignite into chaos when confined inside a metal tube 30,000 feet above the ground. Passengers held their breath. The elderly man in 1D shifted forward in his seat. The couple clutched hands. Elena Morales in 3C steadied her phone. Live stream numbers climbing rapidly past 1,500. The chat scrolled with outrage and disbelief. Daniel approached calmly, gesturing for Melissa to hand him the ticket. She gave Nathaniel a sharp nod. "Show it to him," she demanded, her voice too loud, too brittle. Nathaniel leaned down, retrieved his phone, and tapped the screen again. He held it out without hesitation. His movements were slow, deliberate, a man with nothing to hide. Daniel took the phone, scanning the pass with the practiced precision of someone who had done it thousands of times. The handheld device beeped, green light flashing. Valid. He examined the seat number, the flight information, the barcode. Everything matched. He nodded slowly. "This ticket is fully valid." Murmurs rippled across the cabin like a sudden gust of wind. Relief and vindication shimmered in the air. Elena's viewers lit up the feed. "See, legit. This is harassment." She can't deny it now, but Melissa did deny it. Her cheeks flushed red as she snapped, "The system can be hacked. People like him don't belong here. I've seen it before." The phrase dropped again like acid into water. People like him. Elena's camera caught every word, the comment section exploding with fury. Nathaniel's jaw tightened, though his body remained composed. Inside, he felt the sting of her words pierce deep, but he refused to give her the satisfaction of reaction. Daniel's brows furrowed, his voice carrying a warning. "Melissa, the ticket is valid. That should be the end of it." She turned on him, eyes blazing. "You don't understand. It doesn't feel right. Look at him. Look at how he's sitting here as if he owns the place. It doesn't fit." Gasps broke from several passengers. The elderly man in 1D slammed his hand against the armrest. "Enough. The man belongs here. His ticket proves it. What more do you want?" Melissa whipped around, her voice cracking under the weight of her own fury. "Are you calling me a liar?" "No," the old man shot back, his voice clipped and unwavering. "I'm saying you are making a grave mistake." Elena's livestream viewer count surged past 3,000. Hashtags filling the chat. "Discrimination in the skies. Fire her now. He's calm. She's unhinged." Nathaniel inhaled deeply, steadying himself. Every fiber of his being told him to rise, to speak louder, to force his truth into the air. But he resisted. He understood power in ways Melissa never could. Power was not noise. Power was patience, control, the quiet confidence of someone who knew the truth would bend the world if only he stayed firm. The cockpit door opened then, metallic hinge creaking like the opening of a courtroom door. Out stepped Captain Robert Ellis, tall, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair neatly combed back. His very presence shifted the energy of the cabin. The whispers stilled. The chaos softened. Authority had arrived. "What is holding up my flight?" the captain asked, his voice low but resonant, the voice of a man used to being obeyed. Daniel stepped forward immediately, handing him the phone and Nathaniel's ID. Ticket scans valid. Passport matches. No sign of forgery. Captain Ellis examined the documents carefully, his sharp eyes flicking from the photo to the man seated in 2A. A long pause, then he gave a single small nod. "Everything checks out. This passenger is cleared to sit here." The relief that swept through the cabin was palpable. A low wave of murmurs followed. The couple in row 1 exhaled audibly. Elena's chat exploded with comments. Finally, the captain speaks truth. She has no ground now. Justice. But Melissa's face hardened further. Her cheeks burned crimson. She took a step forward, her voice trembling but still loud enough to carry. "Captain, with all respect, I know fraud when I see it. He doesn't belong here. The way he acts, the way he looks, he doesn't fit first class." The cabin froze. Every sound vanished except the hum of the engines outside. Passengers stared in disbelief, some with mouths slightly open, others shaking their heads. The elderly gentleman in 1D nearly rose from his seat. "What did you just say?" Captain Ellis turned slowly toward Melissa, his voice a blade sheathed in steel. "On what grounds?" "Melissa, intuition, prejudice." Her lips trembled. She forced out, "Just the way he sits, the way he carries himself. It doesn't look right." The silence afterward was deafening. Passengers' faces hardened with disgust. Elena's camera zoomed closer. Live stream comments surging past 5,000 viewers. Blatant racism. Unacceptable. This captain better fire her on the spot. Ellis inhaled sharply, returning Nathaniel's documents with a bow of his head. "Mr. Carter, my apologies for the delay. Your ticket and ID are fully valid. You have every right to sit in seat 2A. Nathaniel nodded once, his voice steady and calm. "Thank you, Captain." Melissa tried one last desperate attack. Her voice cracked as she nearly shouted, "Then, I want to inspect his bag. If he has nothing to hide, he should have no fear." A chorus of outrage burst from the passengers. "That's too far. This is harassment." Elena's voice joined them, her live stream echoing with fury. Captain Ellis snapped, his tone commanding. "That's enough. You've crossed the line. On this aircraft, no passenger is searched without cause. Not today, not ever." Melissa froze. For the first time, her confidence faltered. Her hands trembled slightly as she stood in place, caught between authority and stubbornness. "Return to your station now," Ellis ordered, each word hammered into the air like a verdict. The passengers erupted into murmurs of approval. Elena's viewers soared past 7,000. The elderly man in 1D muttered, "Finally." Nathaniel sat still, his composure unbroken. He had not raised his voice, had not fought with fire. It was his calm, his stillness under fire, that stripped Melissa bare. As she retreated toward the galley, her face flushed and her hands shaking, Captain Ellis gave a final nod to Nathaniel. "Enjoy your flight, sir?" Nathaniel inclined his head, a quiet acknowledgement. But inside, he knew this was not over. The humiliation had already been broadcast to thousands. The words, "people like you," would not simply fade when the engines lifted them into the night sky. They would echo long after landing, reverberating through boardrooms, news feeds, and markets. Nathaniel reached for his briefcase. Pulling out his tablet, he typed a quick message to his assistant in New York. "Delay board meeting by 1 hour. Prepare Pacific Skies contract. Clause 14.3 on discrimination. I will need it ready." He closed the tablet and leaned back, gazing out the window where the taxi lights shimmered across the runway. Around him, passengers whispered, phones glowed, and the live stream audience swelled to nearly 10,000. Yet Nathaniel remained silent. He knew the real storm had only just begun. The engines rumbled softly as Pacific Skies Flight 618 began its slow taxi, the aircraft vibrating like a restless beast preparing for flight. Yet, inside the first-class cabin, no one was focused on the usual rhythms of departure. No one cared about the safety demonstration, the seatbelt clicks, or the subtle aroma of reheated meals drifting from the galley. Every gaze remained tethered to seat 2A, where Nathaniel Carter sat still, as composed as a statue. The eye of the storm that had shaken the cabin, Melissa Grant, lingered in the galley, her hands trembling against the counter though she tried to steady them. The humiliation clung to her like smoke, the weight of every passenger's stare pressing into her back. For years she had strutted through cabins with authority, confident that her judgment would always stand. But tonight, her words had been exposed, her certainty undermined in front of strangers who now looked at her as though she were poison. Elena Morales angled her phone discreetly, the live stream counter surging past 11,000. She whispered to herself as much as to her audience. He hasn't raised his voice once. He hasn't cursed or shouted, and yet he's the most powerful person in this room. The comments scrolled furiously. "This man is unshakable. She is finished. This is what dignity looks like." Nathaniel shifted slightly, opening his leather briefcase with the quiet precision of someone who had rehearsed such gestures 1,000 times. Inside lay a tablet, sleek and silver, its glow reflecting faintly against his glasses. He tapped the screen, his fingers moving quickly, purposeful. For most watching, it looked like a man checking emails, perhaps adjusting tomorrow's schedule. But for Nathaniel, it was preparation. He typed a single line to his assistant and New York contract review confirmed, "Activate clause discussion. Prepare files for Pacific Skies." He paused for a moment, staring at the screen. His reflection gazed back at him, calm but resolute. Beneath that calmness, however, ran a current of memory, a thread that pulled him back years into the past. He remembered being a boy, watching his father walk away from a store after being accused of theft, though nothing had been taken. He remembered his mother whispering in the car that they had to pick their battles, that survival sometimes meant silence. He remembered promising himself, at 12 years old, that one day he would be in a position where silence was no longer required, where he could force the world to listen. Tonight, in seat 2A, he felt the weight of that childhood vow. The aircraft jolted gently as it turned onto the runway. Lights flickered across the window, stripes of gold and white cutting through the darkness. Passengers tightened their belts, leaned back in their seats. The roar of acceleration filled the cabin, engines thundering, pressing every body against the cushions. For a brief moment, the sheer power of takeoff distracted them, reminded them of the primal miracle of flight. But as the plane lifted, wheels leaving the earth behind, attention returned swiftly to Nathaniel. He closed his tablet and folded his hands once more, gazing out into the night sky. To the casual eye, he seemed to rest. To those who looked closer, he seemed to plan. Melissa peeked from the galley, her face pale. She caught Nathaniel's calm gaze for just an instant, and something inside her faltered. It was not anger she saw there, nor even satisfaction. It was composure so complete it frightened her, the look of a man who knew outcomes before they arrived. She retreated quickly, her heart racing. Elena leaned closer to her screen, whispering, "Do you see that he doesn't even need to speak? His silence is louder than her shouting." Viewers responded instantly. Power. Absolute grace. I'd follow this man into battle. Nathaniel leaned his head back against the seat, closing his eyes briefly. In the darkness behind his lids, he considered his options. He could let the incident fade, chalk it up as another wound in a lifetime of slides. He could arrive in New York, attend his meeting, close his deal, and let Melissa's words evaporate like smoke in the wind. But then he thought of every other passenger of color who might one day sit in seat 2A and face the same humiliation. He thought of how silence had always preserved the comfort of institutions while eroding the dignity of individuals. And he knew, as surely as he knew the engines outside would hold them aloft, that this time silence would not be his choice. The seatbelt sign dinged softly, releasing passengers into cautious motion. Tray tables unfolded, phones unlocked, soft murmurs returned. Yet beneath the ordinary choreography of flight, the current of tension remained. Elena's live stream now surged past 13,000, spreading rapidly across platforms. Comments flashed, tagging news outlets now. This needs to go viral. She won't survive this night. Nathaniel reopened his tablet, sliding a sleek silver business card from the case and resting it beside the screen. The embossed letters gleamed faintly. Aerostar Systems. Nathaniel Carter, Chief Executive Officer. He stared at the card, his thumb brushing the raised lettering. It was not arrogance he felt in that moment, but responsibility. Responsibility to the thousands of employees whose livelihoods were tied to his leadership, to the communities who looked to him as proof that barriers could be broken, and to his daughter, who deserved a world where her dignity would never be questioned on a plane seat. A soft chime broke his thoughts. He pressed the call button above his head once, decisively. The sound echoed through the cabin, ordinary yet ominous in context. Heads turned, cameras lifted again. Melissa appeared within seconds, her smile forced, her voice brittle. "What can I do for you, sir?" Nathaniel lifted his head slowly, his eyes calm but unwavering. "Please ask Captain Ellis to speak with me when he has a moment." Melissa blinked, her mask cracking for just a second. "The captain is busy flying the plane. I can help you instead." Nathaniel gave a slight shake of his head. "No, thank you. I'll wait for the captain." The passengers exchanged glances, whispers humming like quiet electricity. Elena's viewers spiked to 14,000. Comments scrolling faster than her eyes could follow. "He's about to drop something big. This feels like a movie." Melissa stood frozen for a moment, then turned sharply on her heel. her footsteps quick and uneven as she retreated to the cockpit. Nathaniel folded his hands again, exhaling slowly. His mind was clear. This was no longer about a single seat. It was about systems, about accountability, about whether power could be leveraged not for revenge, but for reform. He had walked into countless boardrooms where billions were at stake, but tonight, in the quiet hum of Seat 2A, he felt the weight of a boardroom far larger, the courtroom of public opinion, the verdict of history. The cockpit door opened a few minutes later. Low voices spilled out Melissa's sharp, urgent protests, the captain's deep, steady baritone. Then Captain Ellis stepped into the cabin once more, walking with the deliberate authority of a judge entering his chamber. He stopped at Nathaniel's row, his voice calm but resonant. "Mr. Carter, you asked to see me." Nathaniel closed his tablet, picked up the silver business card, and held it between two fingers. His voice carried, deep and steady, resonant enough to fill the cabin. "Thank you, Captain. I thought you should know exactly who I am." He extended the card. Captain Ellis took it, his eyes scanning the letters. His posture shifted almost instantly. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by disbelief. He looked again at Nathaniel, then back at the card. His voice softened, almost trembling. "You're the CEO of Aerostar Systems." The air in the cabin froze. Passengers inhaled sharply. Elena's live stream spiked past 15,000 viewers in a matter of seconds. Comments erupted like a dam breaking. Plot twist. He owns the skies. This is bigger than anyone thought. Melissa appeared at the galley, pale and rigid, her confidence drained. She mouthed words silently but could not form them. For the first time, she seemed to realize she had not merely questioned a passenger, but challenged a man who could shake the very foundations of her airline. Nathaniel leaned back, his voice calm yet sharp as a blade. "That's correct. Every Pacific Skies aircraft in service tonight relies on maintenance, engines, and systems overseen by my company. I don't raise my voice because I don't need to. My contracts speak louder than anger ever could." The cabin was silent, the engines outside their only soundtrack. Passengers sat frozen, realizing they were not just watching an argument but the beginning of something far larger. And Nathaniel Carter, still seated in 2A, knew the revelation was only the first step. Captain Robert Ellis stood frozen with the silver business card still in his hand. The words glinted under the cabin lights, each letter as sharp as a blade. Aerostar Systems, Nathaniel Carter, Chief Executive Officer. His jaw tightened, his eyes flicking between the card and the man in seat 2A. It was as if the weight of the entire aircraft had suddenly shifted, and he was the only one who felt it pressing down. Around them, passengers leaned forward. Some mouths were slightly open, others tightened with disbelief. Elena Morales whispered into her phone, though her words were meant as much for her swelling livestream audience as for herself. "He's the CEO. That's why he's so calm. That's why he never moved. Oh my God, this changes everything." The viewer counter surged past 17,000, comments exploding in real time. Melissa Grant's skin drained of color, her arms crossed tightly against her chest, but her trembling betrayed her. All her bravado, all her sharp words dissolved into the harsh silence that now surrounded her. Her eyes darted between the captain, the card, and Nathaniel, as if searching for some lifeline, some loophole that might undo what she had already said, but there was none. Nathaniel reached calmly into his case again, retrieving his tablet. With a few swift taps, a document appeared on the screen, its heading bold and unmistakable: Pacific Skies Maintenance Agreement. He angled the device toward Captain Ellis. "You might want to read Section 14.3. The captain hesitated, then leaned down. His eyes moved steadily across the lines. As he read aloud, the words struck the cabin like a verdict. Aerostar Systems reserves the right to immediately suspend or terminate maintenance contracts if the partner airline, its employees, or representatives engage in discriminatory behavior that violates principles of equality and respect." Gasps rippled through first class. Elena's audience shot upward to 19,000. Comments poured in like wildfire. Clause 14.3. He has them cornered. This is history in real time. She's finished. The airline might be finished too. Nathaniel let the silence stretch before speaking. His voice measured, deliberate. This clause has never been invoked until tonight. Melissa stumbled a step back, her mouth opening and closing without sound. Her eyes shone with tears that she refused to let fall, her throat working as she tried to form an objection. "It was just a misunderstanding. I didn't mean—" Nathaniel cut her off with a calmness that carried more force than any shout. "A misunderstanding is forgetting a meal order. A misunderstanding is misplacing luggage. What happened here was humiliation. Public, deliberate, repeated humiliation. You told me I did not belong. You told me people like me did not fit in this cabin. That is not a misunderstanding. That is prejudice in uniform." The cabin was silent except for the drone of the engines. Every passenger was still, eyes wide, breaths shallow. They were not just witnesses to an argument. They were witnesses to the exposure of an entire system that had for too long relied on silence. The elderly man in 1D whispered, "My God," shaking his head slowly. The couple in row 1 clutched hands tighter, staring at Nathaniel as though seeing him anew. Elena's livestream counter passed 20,000. Her feed flooded with a single phrase repeated again and again: "Not negotiable." Captain Ellis straightened, his voice heavy. "Mr. Carter, what do you want me to do?" Nathaniel closed the tablet, slipping it back into his briefcase with deliberate calm. He folded his hands, his gaze steady on the captain. "That is not for you to decide tonight. That is for your executives to answer in the morning. But make no mistake, Captain, this will not pass quietly." Melissa stepped forward, her voice breaking into desperation. "Please, I have a family. I've given 15 years to this airline. I was only doing my duty. I never meant harm." Nathaniel's eyes did not soften. They were not cruel, but they were unflinching. "Did you think about my family when you tried to strip me of dignity in front of strangers? Did you think about my daughter when you said people like me? Did you think about anyone who has ever sat here, heart pounding, forced to prove their worth because someone in authority decided they didn't belong?" Melissa's lips quivered. For the first time in years, words failed her completely. Elena whispered into her phone, her voice thick with emotion. "This isn't just about him. He's speaking for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong." The comments exploded in agreement. Nathaniel leaned back slowly, his voice calm once more, though his words carried the weight of stone. "Pacific Skies has one night to decide, change or pay the price." The engines roared louder as the plane climbed higher, slicing through the night sky. The cabin lights glowed soft amber, casting long shadows across faces frozen in disbelief. No one touched their meals. No one adjusted their screens. Every passenger remained transfixed by the man in 2A who had turned humiliation into a reckoning. Melissa retreated into the galley, her shoulders sagging, her steps unsteady. She pressed her back to the wall, fighting to steady her breath. The uniform that once gave her authority now felt like a costume stripped of power. Every whisper in the cabin, every furtive glance, felt like a blade. Nathaniel closed his eyes for a moment, exhaling slowly. Inside, the battle was not over. His mind flickered with doubts. Would the executives try to bury the incident? Would the public pressure fade too quickly? Would reform be reduced to shallow promises? He wrestled with the weight of responsibility. He knew his next steps had to strike with precision, but beneath the uncertainty was clarity. 2. He had leverage, and leverage wielded properly could force a system to its knees. This was not about vengeance. This was about building a precedent that could not be ignored, one that would ripple through every boarding gate, every cabin, every company handbook in the industry. The plane leveled off at 30,000 feet, the seatbelt sign chiming softly. Around him, passengers whispered quietly, some sending texts, others watching Elena's stream grow by the second. 25,000 viewers, 28, a wave building into a storm. Nathaniel reopened his briefcase, drawing out his tablet once more. He typed a message to his assistant. Confirm 8 a.m. Meeting with Pacific Skies executives. Prepare options 1 through 3. Bring legal counsel. Include termination notices for all associated contracts. He hit send and closed the case. His jaw tightened slightly, then relaxed. It was done. The wheels were already in motion. For the rest of the cabin, the flight stretched long into the night, but the usual rhythm of travel was gone. This was no longer a journey between two cities. It had become a reckoning suspended in the air, a verdict waiting to land. Nathaniel leaned back in his seat, gazing out into the vast darkness beyond the window. He saw the faint curve of the earth, the endless scatter of stars, and he thought, not for the first time, that dignity should never have to be defended at 30,000 feet. Yet here he was, doing exactly that. He whispered to himself, almost inaudible, never again. And though the cabin was quiet, though only the engines filled the silence, those words carried a weight that would echo far beyond the walls of Pacific Skies Flight 618. The hum of the engines filled the cabin like a constant drumbeat, steady yet ominous. Outside, the sky was endless, dark and scattered with stars. Inside, the first-class passengers remained caught in silence, all eyes fixed on the man in seat 2A. Nathaniel Carter had not raised his voice, yet the weight of his presence pressed on everyone like gravity itself. Melissa Grant crouched low in the galley, her shoulders shaken as though she were trying to disappear into the walls. She had never felt so exposed, so stripped of authority. Just hours ago she had walked onto this aircraft with certainty, believing she knew how to command respect. Now every ounce of that certainty had collapsed, replaced with the suffocating awareness that she had triggered something far larger than herself. Captain Robert Ellis stood near Nathaniel, his jaw clenched, the silver business card still heavy in his pocket. He had faced engine failures, storms, even medical emergencies mid-air, but nothing had rattled him quite like this. A contract clause had turned his aircraft into a courtroom, and he was no longer just a pilot, but an unwilling witness to a trial of dignity. Elena Morales whispered into her phone, though her live stream audience of 29,000 hardly needed the narration. You're watching history unfold. He's not just defending himself, he's holding an airline accountable in real time. Comments flooded her screen. Power, courage, this is justice at 30,000 feet. Nathaniel opened his briefcase again, lifting out the tablet with calm precision. He placed it on the tray table, the glow illuminating his composed face. His voice was steady, each word deliberate. Captain, since you asked earlier what I want, let me make it plain. Pacific Skies has 3 choices, and I want you and everyone here to be the first witnesses. The cabin leaned in, passengers barely breathing. Even the couple in row 1 who had earlier kept their heads down now stared with wide eyes. Nathaniel raised 3 fingers. Option 1, I terminate the Aerostar maintenance contract immediately. That means within 7 days. 132 of your aircraft lose certified support. Pacific Skies will be grounded in less than a week. Tens of thousands of employees affected. Schedules collapsed, passengers stranded. Your airline would be finished. Gasps cut through the air. A businessman in 1C dropped his pen, the click echoing unnaturally loud. Elena's viewers surged past 32,000, comments pouring in like a tidal wave. Game over if he does that. This airline would collapse overnight. Nathaniel lowered 1 finger. Option 2, Pacific Skies keeps the contract, but they must immediately dismiss every employee involved in this incident. That includes frontline staff who participated and any supervisors who failed to act. At the same time, the airline must launch mandatory anti-bias training across the entire workforce. Not the kind checked off on paper, but tested, measured, reported. His gaze flicked briefly toward Melissa, whose breath came in short, broken bursts. Option 3, Nathaniel continued, lowering another finger. I withdraw Aerostar's partnership entirely and transfer your contract to your competitors. American, Delta, United, Southwest, each of them has approached me more than once. I assure you, they would welcome it. The weight of the words fell like stones into water, rippling through the cabin. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at Nathaniel with awe, others with fear, all aware that the fate of an entire airline had just been placed in the hands of a man they had nearly seen dragged out of first class. Captain Ellis inhaled deeply, his voice low, almost hoarse. Mr. Carter, with respect, these are consequences I can't even imagine. Nathaniel leaned back slightly, his tone calm but cutting. That's precisely the problem. Captain, for too long, people like me have had to imagine humiliation at every boarding gate, every ticket counter, every flight. Now, for once, the consequences are not ours to bear. They are yours. Melissa finally stumbled forward, her face wet with tears, her voice cracking. Please, I never meant for this. I was doing my job. I didn't think. Nathaniel's eyes fixed on her, steady and unflinching. You didn't think. You assumed. You judged. You reduced me to an image in your mind and denied my humanity in front of strangers. You did it because you thought there would be no cost. But dignity is not free. Tonight, Pacific Skies will pay its price. Melissa collapsed into a seat in the galley jump seat, covering her face with her hands. No one reached to comfort her. Even her fellow attendants avoided her gaze, their faces pale with dread. Elena's live stream climbed past 35,000 viewers, comments exploding faster than she could read. Option 2 or nothing. This man is rewriting history. Never seen power used like this. Nathaniel folded his hands, his voice softer now, but carrying the same gravity. I do not seek destruction. I do not want to ground planes or cost jobs, but I will not tolerate humiliation. Pacific Skies must choose, reform, or collapse. There is no middle ground. The elderly man in 1D finally spoke again, his voice raspy but firm. Young man, I've flown for 40 years. I've seen delays, fights, mechanical issues, but I've never witnessed anything like this. You're right. Enough is enough. A murmur of agreement passed through the cabin. For the first time, passengers began to speak openly, their voices trembling with a mix of anger and relief. The couple in row 1 nodded, whispering, "He's right. She went too far." Captain Ellis straightened, adjusting his uniform. "Mr. Carter, I'll relay your message. But may I ask why give them options at all? Why not simply end it?" Nathaniel's expression softened for the first time, though his eyes still glimmered with steel. "Because, Captain, destruction teaches nothing. Change requires choice. If Pacific Skies reforms, this moment will be remembered not just as a scandal, but as the night an industry learned that dignity is non-negotiable." Ellis bowed his head slightly, as though acknowledging a lesson carried from passenger to pilot. He turned to leave, but not before glancing at Melissa one last time, his expression heavy with disappointment. The cabin remained steeped in silence, but it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of recognition, of understanding that they were present for a turning point that would ripple outward far beyond this one flight. Nathaniel leaned back, his eyes drifting to the stars beyond the window. He thought of his daughter again, her laughter, her questions about why people stared sometimes when they traveled together. He thought of what it meant to sit here tonight, to endure humiliation so that maybe, just maybe, she would never have to. He whispered to himself, a vow barely audible. This is bigger than me. And as the aircraft soared higher into the night, the ultimatum hung heavy in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. Pacific Skies had until morning to choose its future. The aircraft began its slow descent toward New York, the city's lights stretching like a glittering river below. For most overnight flights, this moment was routine seatbacks upright, tray tables stowed, belts fastened as passengers prepared for the jolt of landing. But tonight, on Pacific Skies, Flight 618, no one moved with routine. The air was too heavy, every mind locked on the ultimatum laid bare in the first-class cabin. Nathaniel Carter sat in 2A, his posture unshaken, his gaze fixed on the window where the skyline drew nearer. His words still lingered, echoing in the silence reform or collapse. He had spoken them calmly, but their weight was tectonic. Around him, passengers sat in hushed awe. They were not just travelers anymore. They were witnesses. Melissa Grant remained in the galley, her uniform damp with sweat, her hands trembling in her lap. She had not returned to address the cabin. Her authority had evaporated, her role reduced to a figure of disgrace. Every vibration of the aircraft seemed to rattle through her bones. She closed her eyes, wishing desperately for the night to end, but she knew this story would follow her far beyond the tarmac. Captain Robert Ellis announced the landing with a voice steadier than he felt. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our final approach into New York. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened. His tone carried the formality of command, but underneath it was the weight of a man who knew that when those wheels touched down, he would step into a storm no training manual had prepared him for. Elena Morales angled her phone one last time toward Nathaniel. Her live stream now surged past 41,000 viewers. The feed was filled with hashtags, outrage, and awe. This is the moment everything changes. Pacific Skies is done unless they act. Dignity is not negotiable. Her viewers begged her to stay live through the landing. She nodded softly, whispering, "You'll see it with me." The plane touched down with a screech of tires, the cabin jolting as momentum bled off in a long roar. Passengers exhaled, but no one clapped, no one cheered. Their silence was respect, not routine. The engines powered down as the aircraft taxied toward the gate, each second thick with anticipation. When the doors opened, cold night air rushed in through the jet bridge. Nathaniel rose slowly, lifting his leather briefcase with the same deliberate calm he had carried all night. He walked forward with measured steps, not rushing, not faltering. To the other passengers, he looked less like a man disembarking a flight and more like a figure stepping onto a stage where the next act of history was about to be written. Melissa followed behind, her head bowed, her hands clutching the strap of her bag. No one spoke to her. No one offered sympathy. Some passengers stepped aside as if her presence carried a stain. She had become the symbol of everything wrong, and the weight of that symbol pressed on her shoulders like lead. Nathaniel entered the terminal. A cluster of Pacific Skies staff stood waiting gate agents, operations managers, security officers. Their eyes darted nervously, their bodies stiff with the knowledge that they were no longer managing a routine arrival. They were managing a crisis. One man stepped forward, his salt and pepper hair slicked back, his suit rumpled from being summoned in haste. His badge identified him as Thomas Green, Regional Director of Operations. He extended a hand, his voice rehearsed but uneasy. "Mr. Carter, welcome to New York. On behalf of Pacific Skies, I want to apologize." Nathaniel did not shake his hand. He simply raised a brow, his calmness more piercing than anger. "Save it for the morning meeting. Words tonight mean nothing." He walked past, his assistant already waiting near the terminal doors with a black sedan idling outside. The operations staff stood frozen, watching him leave. For the first time, they understood the imbalance of power had shifted. This was not a customer complaint to be managed. This was an existential threat to the company's survival. Inside the corporate tower of Pacific Skies, the storm had already begun. It was nearly midnight, but the top-floor boardroom glowed with harsh fluorescent lights. Executives crowded around the table, their faces pale with exhaustion and fear. Screens replayed clips from Elena's live stream, now trending across every major platform. He gave them options. One vice president muttered, her voice trembling, "Terminate the contract, reform, or hand it to competitors. If he pulls it, we're finished." The head of communications rubbed his temples. "The live stream has been picked up by CNN, Bloomberg, and half a dozen others already. The hashtags are climbing globally. If we don't act before markets open, the stock will crater." The CEO, a tall man named Richard Lawson, paced the room like a trapped animal. His tie hung loose, his eyes bloodshot. "We need a strategy by sunrise. This isn't damage control. This is survival." back at his hotel suite overlooking Manhattan. Nathaniel sat quietly in the corner of the room, his briefcase open on the coffee table. His assistant placed a steaming cup of tea beside him, but he hardly touched it. His mind was already in the morning boardroom, rehearsing every word, every clause. He knew the company would try to offer apologies, perhaps even settlements, but he also knew that tonight was an opportunity to demand systemic reform. For a fleeting moment, doubt flickered through him. What if they resisted? What if they called his bluff? The financial risk was enormous, even for Aerostar. Walking away from such a contract would ripple across his own workforce, his own bottom line. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and reminded himself of the truth he had carried since boyhood. Dignity was not negotiable. He rose and stepped to the window. The city pulsed below, alive with lights, a constant reminder that the world never slept. Somewhere out there, his daughter was already awake, her phone buzzing with notifications, friends sending her the viral clips of her father standing calm against humiliation. He wondered what she thought. Would she see him as strong? Would she feel protected? Or would she feel the sting that it had happened at all? He clenched the edge of the curtain, his voice barely audible. Tomorrow isn't about contracts. It's about making sure she never has to fight this same battle. In the terminal, Melissa sat alone in a small office, awaiting the inevitable. 2 security officers lingered by the door, silent but firm. She wiped her eyes, her face raw, her uniform crumpled. She knew suspension was certain, termination likely. But what haunted her most was not the loss of her job. It was the knowledge that thousands had watched her words echo across the world. She was no longer just a flight attendant who made a mistake. She was a symbol of prejudice, and symbols rarely get second chances. The night stretched long, heavy with the promise of what morning would bring. By the time dawn broke over Manhattan, the glass tower of Pacific Sky's headquarters already buzzed with frantic energy. Lights glared from every floor. Staff shuffled papers. Phones rang non-stop. And in the boardroom on the 24th floor, a dozen of the airline's highest-ranking executives sat rigid, their faces pale under the fluorescent glare. None of them had slept. The weight of the night's events pressed on them heavier than jet fuel in the belly of a fully loaded aircraft. At the far end of the polished mahogany table sat Richard Lawson, CEO of Pacific Skies. His jaw was tight, his tie loosened, but he tried to project control. To his right, the head of legal flipped nervously through contract pages, eyes dart into clause 14.3 as if the words themselves were a curse. The communications director checked his phone obsessively, watching hashtags climb like flames. The head of human resources sat stiff, her knuckles white around a pen she had not yet dared to use. The door opened. Nathaniel Carter entered. He wore the same navy suit from the night before, yet he looked untouched by exhaustion. His leather briefcase rested easily in his hand, his posture straight, his gaze calm. His assistant followed silently, carrying a folder of documents, then set them neatly on the table before stepping back. Nathaniel did not ask permission to sit at the head of the table. He simply took the chair, the gesture alone, shifting the balance of power in the room. Executives glanced at one another, their unspoken question clear: who was in charge now, them or him? Richard Lawson cleared his throat, his voice measured but uneasy. Mr. Carter, first let me extend our deepest apologies on behalf of Pacific Skies. What occurred last night does not reflect our values as a company. The behavior of our employee was unacceptable. She has already been placed on immediate suspension." Nathaniel placed his briefcase on the table and folded his hands. His voice was calm, precise. "An apology is words. I am here for actions." A hush fell across the room. Lawson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "We understand your frustration. We are committed to resolving this matter quickly and quietly." "Quietly," Nathaniel repeated, his tone sharp enough to cut. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze locking onto Lawson's. "You think this can be swept under the rug. You think I sat silent last night only to accept a press release this morning. No, that time is over. What happened on Flight 618 was not just a breach of etiquette, it was a breach of humanity, and it will not vanish quietly." The communications director spoke quickly, trying to salvage ground. "We are drafting a statement, Mr. Carter. It will acknowledge the incident and reaffirm our commitment to equality." Nathaniel raised a hand, cutting him off. "Stop. Do not insult me with hollow statements. Do not insult your passengers, your employees, or the public with phrases you do not intend to uphold. I gave your airline 3 options last night. This morning, you will choose." He lifted 3 fingers, the gesture sharp against the polished table. "Option 1, terminate the maintenance contract. Pacific Skies collapses. Option 2, retain the contract, but dismiss every employee involved in the incident and implement systemic reform across your organization. Option 3, I transfer your contract to your competitors, who have been waiting for the chance." The legal counsel spoke up, his voice cracking slightly. "If you invoke Clause 14.3, our fleet will be grounded within days. We cannot." Nathaniel leaned back, his tone almost soft, yet heavy with iron. "Then you already know the cost of inaction." The HR director finally spoke, her voice low, trembling. "What exactly do you require under Option 2? Nathaniel opened the folder his assistant had placed before him. Inside were neatly typed documents, each page marked with his firm's embossed letterhead. He slid the first across the table. "First, every employee directly involved in last night's incident must be dismissed. That includes the chief attendant and any supervisors who enabled her." The HR director's face flushed. She nodded slowly, though her pen remained poised above blank paper. "Second," Nathaniel continued, sliding another page, "every customer-facing employee in your airline will undergo mandatory anti-bias and dignity training. Not once, not as a symbolic gesture, but annually, with testing, with reporting, with accountability." He slid the third document. "Third, you will establish an anonymous reporting system accessible to both employees and passengers. Every report of discrimination will be investigated within 24 hours, and you will publish quarterly metrics to prove compliance." His eyes swept the room, settling on each executive in turn. "Finally, executive bonuses will be tied directly to diversity, equity, and dignity metrics. No progress, no payout." The room fell into stunned silence. The executives looked at one another, their pale faces reflecting fear and disbelief. The communications director broke the silence with a weak protest. "Mr. Carter, these measures will be extremely costly. We are already stretched thin." Nathaniel's voice struck like thunder. "More costly than losing an $800 million annual contract. More costly than watching your stock collapse when markets open in 2 hours. More costly than being remembered as the airline that chose prejudice over dignity." The words slammed into them with undeniable force. Even Lawson, who had tried to keep his composure, lowered his gaze. For a long moment, the room was silent but for the hum of the city outside, traffic buzzing below the tower. Then the elderly legal counsel whispered, almost to himself, "If we do not accept, we are finished." Nathaniel leaned back, folding his hands, his voice calmer now. "I am not here to destroy you, but I will not tolerate humiliation. You must decide today, before markets open, whether Pacific Skies will be remembered for its downfall or for its reform." Lawson exhaled slowly, his voice subdued. "You leave us no choice." Nathaniel's gaze softened slightly. "You always had a choice. You just never thought the consequences would arrive. Now they are here." The executives sat in silence, the weight of his words pressing on them like the walls of the tower itself. They knew this was no negotiation. This was a reckoning. Outside, the first rays of sunlight struck the skyscrapers, casting long shadows across the boardroom table, and inside, Pacific Skies faced the reality that their future would be defined not by the contracts they signed, but by the dignity they either upheld or betrayed. The boardroom was a cage of silence. The executives of Pacific Skies sat frozen, their papers untouched, their coffee gone cold, their eyes pinned to Nathaniel Carter as though he were both judge and jury. Outside the glass walls, Manhattan gleamed under the pale light of morning. Inside, the air felt thick, suffocating, charged with the knowledge that one wrong move could unravel everything they had built. Richard Lawson, CEO of Pacific Skies, rubbed his temples. For years, he had commanded this room, but today he felt like a man cornered. His authority had slipped, his voice carried no weight, and across from him sat Nathaniel, calm, deliberate, unyielding. Lawson finally exhaled, the sound breaking the stifling silence. "Mr. Carter," he said, voice low but steady, "we will accept your second option. Pacific Skies will reform. The employees responsible will be dismissed immediately, and the measures you outlined will be implemented." The words seemed to lift and crash into the room at once. Some executives slumped with relief, others stiffened in disbelief. But no one spoke against it. They all knew what refusing meant: the death of the airline. Nathaniel gave a small nod, the faintest trace of acknowledgement. "Wise," he said simply, his tone carrying neither triumph nor mercy, just inevitability. Lawson straightened, trying to reclaim a fragment of dignity. "We will need time to formalize these changes, to coordinate with legal and HR, no." Nathaniel interrupted, his voice sharp as a blade. "Not time. Action. Today." He turned to the head of Human Resources, who flinched under his gaze. "Melissa Grant must be dismissed before this meeting ends. Miguel Alvarez, the supervisor who failed to intervene, as well. Their records must reflect termination for misconduct, not resignation. That distinction matters." The HR director's pen hovered, her lips trembling. "Yes, Mr. Carter, it will be done." Nathaniel's attention shifted to the communications director. "And you. By noon, a public statement must be released, not a hollow apology, a clear commitment. Anti-discrimination policy, mandatory training, reporting systems, and quarterly transparency. I will review the draft before it is published. If I find a single word of deflection, I will know." The communications director swallowed hard, nodding quickly. "Understood." Nathaniel leaned back slightly, folding his hands on the table, his voice lowered, but the steel remained. "You will tie executive bonuses to these metrics. No progress, no payout. I want that written into your governance policy within 30 days. If it is not, Clause 14.3 will be invoked, and our contract ends." The room seemed to shrink, the weight of his demands pressing on every wall. Richard Lawson looked down at his notes, then back at Nathaniel. "You are asking us to dismantle the way we operate?" "No," Nathaniel replied calmly. "I am asking you to build the way you should have operated all along." The legal counsel finally found his voice. "Mr. Carter, may I ask, why spare us at all? You could have ended this company overnight." Nathaniel's eyes softened, though his tone remained steady. "Because destruction teaches nothing. If you collapse, others will dismiss you as an outlier, an exception. But if you change, if you reform, then others will be forced to follow. I am not here to win a battle for myself. I am here to ensure no one else has to fight it." For a moment, silence returned, but it was a different silence than before, less suffocating, more contemplative. The executives shifted uneasily, but none could deny the truth of his words. Lawson finally rose to his feet, adjusting his tie with a shaky hand. "Then it is decided. We will move forward as you demand." Nathaniel stood as well, matching his height, though he did not need the gesture to command presence. "Good. You may think you are yielding to me, but remember you are yielding to your passengers, to your employees, to the principle of dignity itself. Do not forget that, or you will find yourself back here again, but next time with no way out." He gathered his briefcase, sliding the documents back inside with methodical precision. His assistant rose beside him, ready to leave. Nathaniel turned toward the door, then paused, his voice carrying across the room one last time. "I will be watching, and so will the world. Choose wisely every day, not just today." He walked out, leaving the executives in stunned silence. The boardroom exhaled all at once, chairs creaking, papers shuffling nervously. Lawson sank back into his seat, staring at the polished table. "We've just been given a second chance," he muttered, almost to himself. "God help us if we waste it." Down in the lobby, journalists had already gathered, tipped off by leaks from the terminal and the wildfire spread of Elena Morales' live stream. Flashbulbs burst as Nathaniel stepped through the revolving doors, his expression calm, unreadable. Microphones thrust forward, voices clamored with questions. "Mr. Carter, are you terminating the contract? Will Pacific Skies survive this scandal? Is this the beginning of a larger movement?" Nathaniel paused on the steps, the morning sun catching the edges of his suit. He did not smile. He did not posture. His voice was clear, steady, carried by conviction. "This is not about one flight. This is about dignity, and dignity is not negotiable." The crowd erupted, questions flying, cameras flashing, but Nathaniel walked forward, slipping into the waiting car. The door closed, muffling the chaos outside. Inside, silence wrapped around him. His assistant glanced at him with awe, but Nathaniel only leaned back, his eyes distant, his mind already beyond this morning. He knew this was just the beginning. Back in the terminal office, Melissa sat hunched in a chair, a termination notice sliding across the desk toward her. Her hands trembled as she read the words, the official end to a career she had thought unshakable. She signed with a shaking pen, tears blurring the paper. For the first time, she realized the depth of what she had unleashed. Not just the loss of her job, but the recognition that her prejudice had nearly toppled an airline. She left the office quietly, her steps slow, her head bowed. No applause, no sympathy, only silence following her out. Meanwhile, across social media, Elena Morales' footage continued to spread, dissected by commentators, shared by activists, debated by millions. The hashtag, Our Pacific Skies Discrimination, hit #1 worldwide, and beneath it, another began to rise. Dignity, not negotiable. In offices across the aviation industry, executives watched in real time, realizing this was not an isolated scandal but a reckoning. Calls began, memos circulated, emergency meetings scheduled. They all knew if Nathaniel Carter could force Pacific Skies to bend, he could force them too. As his car crossed the Brooklyn Bridge, Nathaniel allowed himself a moment to close his eyes. Fatigue pressed against him now, but beneath it, a quiet resolve held firm. He had not sought this fight, but once it came, he had refused to back down. That refusal had changed more than one night, more than one company. It had changed the conversation itself, and deep down, he knew the fight was far from over. 3 weeks later, the Pacific Skies headquarters looked like a different company. Where once the boardroom echoed with denial and complacency, it now carried the heavy hum of urgency. Reports stacked higher, committees formed overnight, and a new schedule of mandatory trainings filled every department calendar. Melissa Grant's termination had been swift. Her name circulated across headlines, dissected by pundits, studied in corporate seminars as a cautionary tale. Miguel Alvarez, the supervisor who failed to intervene, followed soon after. Both names were etched into the airline's history, not as servants of the sky, but as symbols of the cost of prejudice. In their place, a new set of leaders emerged diverse, carefully vetted, trained not just to enforce policies but to embody them. The HR director, who once trembled under Nathaniel's gaze, now oversaw the largest training rollout in company history. Within 2 weeks, more than 5,000 employees had completed their first round of dignity and bias workshops, each session ending with personal pledges recorded on camera. On the 24th floor, Richard Lawson no longer paced with denial. His tie was tighter, his shoulders straighter, his speech sharpened by necessity. Each morning he received a briefing titled Reform Metrics, compiled by a task force that tracked progress line by line. Complaints logged through the new anonymous reporting system were addressed within 24 hours, and the results were published online for the world to see. The stock, which had dipped in the chaos, began to stabilize. Analysts who had predicted collapse shifted their language, cautiously calling it a rare chance for redemption. Some even credited Lawson for adapting under pressure. Though those inside the company knew the true force behind the change was not Lawson at all. It was Nathaniel Carter. In the weeks that followed the boardroom confrontation, Nathaniel remained publicly measured, rarely giving interviews. But when he spoke, his words carried weight. On Bloomberg, he appeared via video, his voice calm and firm. "This is not about contracts," he said. "This is about a principle dignity is not negotiable. Pacific Skies is only the first. Others will follow," and they did. Within a month, American United and Delta quietly announced new training initiatives. Southwest piloted an anonymous reporting system nearly identical to Pacific Skies. Industry insiders dubbed it the Carter Effect, shorthand for the economic and moral pressure Nathaniel had applied at 30,000 feet. Elena Morales, the passenger who live-streamed the incident, found herself at the center of a new wave of advocacy. Her footage, viewed more than 12 million times, became required viewing in corporate seminars. Universities invited her to speak about accountability in the digital age. She accepted nervously, still unused to the spotlight, but she carried the camera with her everywhere, determined to use her platform for more than just outrage. Melissa Grant disappeared from public view. Rumors circulated. Some said she had moved to another state, others that she was seeking work outside the airline industry. Few cared where she went. To most, she had become a cautionary tale, a reminder of how prejudice in uniform could topple careers overnight. For Nathaniel, the aftermath was quieter but no less demanding. In his glass-walled office at Aerostar Systems, he read the quarterly report from Pacific Skies. Complaints had dropped by 40% in the first month. Employee satisfaction scores ticked upward. Passenger feedback was cautiously positive. But as he turned the pages, his brow furrowed. 40% was progress. Yes, but progress was not victory. He knew the machinery of prejudice was stubborn. Policies could be written, but attitudes required persistence. He closed the report, setting it aside, and looked out at the skyline. His daughter, Maya, now a college sophomore, had sent him a text the night before. "Dad, I saw the clip again today. People were sharing it in class. I just wanted to say I'm proud of you." He had stared at the words longer than he expected, a lump rising in his throat. For years, he had shielded her from the battles he fought, the insults delivered with polite smiles, the suspicion in strangers' eyes. Now, she had seen him confront it not with anger, but with unshakable calm. Yet he wondered what message did it truly send. That power was the only shield. That one needed economic leverage to demand dignity. He wrestled with that thought late at night, pacing his office, staring at the city below. Was he teaching the world that justice depended on influence, or was he carving out space for those without it? The tension gnawed at him. He could not dismiss it. He did not want Maya or anyone to believe that only CEOs could demand respect. Dignity should not be a privilege. It should be a given. At industry conferences, whispers followed him. Executives avoided eye contact, unsure whether to fear him or thank him. Some tried to curry favor, offering small contracts, invitations, partnerships. He declined most, uninterested in gestures that felt like appeasement. Instead, he began drafting the framework for something larger, a foundation, perhaps, or a consortium of airlines bound by enforceable commitments. He spoke quietly with lawyers, activists, and regulators, exploring ways to codify what he had forced Pacific Skies to do voluntarily. If companies would not lead willingly, perhaps law would compel them. Meanwhile, the media refused to let the story die. The New York Times ran a Sunday feature titled "The Man in 2A," tracing the timeline from boarding to boardroom. CNN aired a special segment highlighting the ripple effects across the aviation industry. Talk shows debated whether Nathaniel had overstepped, using his economic leverage as a weapon. Some critics accused him of bullying a company into compliance. Others argued he had revealed the only language corporations understood: money. Nathaniel watched some of these segments in silence, never responding publicly to the criticism. Privately, he admitted to himself that they were partly right. He had used leverage. He had used the threat of collapse. But he had done so because quieter requests had always been ignored. He knew the truth. Morality without consequence rarely moved boardrooms. One evening, as the city lights flickered against the windows of his office. Captain Robert Ellis called. His voice was warm, steady. "Mr. Carter," he said, "I wanted you to know, since that night, we've flown over 100 flights without a single reported incident. Our crews are more alert, more cautious. Some of them thank me, some curse me, but all of them remember what happened." Nathaniel smiled faintly. "It's not me they remember, Captain. It's the mirror that night held up. They saw themselves, and now they cannot unsee it." After the call, he stood at the window, gazing at the skyline. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, he felt the ground shifting. The conversation was no longer confined to whispers. It was public, undeniable, and irreversible. In the weeks ahead, Nathaniel knew there would be setbacks. Resistance would rise, old habits would resurface, executives would seek shortcuts. But he also knew something else. The world had witnessed a man sit firmly in seat 2A, refusing to yield, refusing to be silent. That image had traveled farther than he ever could, and in that image lay the seed of change. 3 months after the night on Flight 618, the world of aviation felt different. Not perfect, not free of prejudice, but undeniably altered. The Pacific Skies headquarters. Once a fortress of denial. Now showcased banners reading "Dignity First" in every terminal. Posters lined crew lounges with new protocols. Training rooms that once gathered dust now bustled with employees and workshops where difficult conversations unfolded daily. Metrics told part of the story. Complaints of discrimination had fallen by 70% compared to the previous quarter. Employee satisfaction, once stagnant, had climbed nearly 20 points. Passenger surveys reflected cautious optimism, noting friendlier service and a visible change in culture. Even Wall Street took notice. Pacific Skies stock, which had dipped sharply after the scandal, rebounded with analysts citing renewed public trust. But numbers could not capture the whole truth. What mattered most were the small changes happening in real time. A black mother boarding with her toddler found herself greeted with a smile instead of suspicion. A Latino businessman flying first class was offered wine without hesitation or sideways glances. A young flight attendant spoke up when she saw a colleague question a passenger unfairly, empowered by the knowledge that her voice now carried weight. These moments did not make headlines, but they were the proof that Nathaniel Carter sought. Quiet revolutions rippling outward from one night, one confrontation, one refusal to surrender dignity. Nathaniel himself kept a deliberate distance from the daily noise. He allowed Pacific Skies to implement its reforms under the watchful eyes of regulators and the relentless glare of the public. He spent his days at Aerostar Systems, where contracts multiplied and engineers designed the future of aviation. But every so often, he received reminders of what had begun in Seat 2A. One came in the form of a letter, handwritten, shaky script. It was from an elderly man named Harold, who had been in Seat 4D that night. "Mr. Carter," the letter read, "I am 72 years old. I thought I had seen progress in my lifetime, but when I saw what they did to you, I realized how much further we have to go. Thank you for standing firm. Because of you, my granddaughter will board her first flight with a little more hope than fear." Another reminder came from his daughter, Maya. She called one evening, her voice bright. "Dad, guess what? My professor used your story in class today. He called it the Carter effect. The whole room debated it for an hour. Some said you were too harsh. Others said you did what no one else dared. But everyone agreed on one thing, that you changed something bigger than one flight. Nathaniel listened quietly, smiling at the sound of her voice. He remembered her text weeks earlier, the pride woven into her words. For all his doubts about using power as a shield, he knew he had at least carved out one truth for her, that silence was never the answer. Meanwhile, the ripples spread beyond aviation. Hospitality chains announced bias training initiatives. Tech companies tied executive bonuses to diversity goals. Universities began using the case of Pacific Skies as a study in both ethics and leadership. The phrase "dignity not negotiable" appeared on protest signs, in boardrooms, on social media hashtags. Critics still voiced their objections. Op-eds questioned whether economic coercion was a fair tool for justice. Pundits argued Nathaniel had wielded his leverage like a weapon. But even the critics could not ignore the outcome's measurable change, real accountability, and a shift in public conversation. For Nathaniel, the true legacy was not in headlines or contracts. It was in the memory of that night, the feel of the leather seat beneath him, the sound of whispers in the cabin, the sting of Lisa Grant's words, "people like you." He carried those words with him still, not as a wound, but as a reminder. Prejudice had not vanished. It lurked in uniforms, in boardrooms, in subtle glances, but it could be confronted, and, when confronted, it could be dismantled. One late afternoon, Nathaniel found himself back at the airport. He was not traveling for business this time, but accompanying Maya on her return to college. As they walked through the terminal, heads turned, whispers trailed, some recognizing him from the viral video. Maya laughed softly. "Dad, you're famous." He shook his head. "No, Maya, I'm just a man who refused to move." At the gate, they paused by the glass wall, watching planes taxi and lift into the sky. Nathaniel's eyes lingered on a Pacific Skies jet glinting in the sun. For the first time, he felt no bitterness seeing the logo, only resolve. As Maya boarded, she hugged him tightly. "Keep fighting, Dad. People need you." He watched her disappear down the jet bridge, then stood alone, the hum of the airport around him. He thought of the millions who had watched that live stream, the thousands who had marched under the banner of dignity since. He thought of the executives who had folded under his gaze, and the employees who now held new power in their voices, and he thought of the future, because he knew this was not the end. Flight 618 would be remembered as the spark, but the fire had only begun to spread. There would be other battles, other boardrooms, other moments where silence beckoned but dignity demanded resistance. Nathaniel picked up his briefcase, the familiar weight grounding him. He walked slowly toward the exit, each step measured, as though he carried not just his own story, but the stories of everyone who had ever been told they did not belong. Outside, the city roared with life. Taxis honked, voices clashed, skyscrapers gleamed. Nathaniel lifted his face to the sky where another jet arced high, leaving a silver trail across the blue, and he whispered to himself. The words that had become both shield and sword, vow and legacy. Dignity is not negotiable. The story of one man in seat to 2A had ended, but the echo of that refusal, quiet, steady, unyielding, was only beginning to change the world. The night on Flight 618 was more than an argument over a seat. It was a mirror, held up for the world to see, reflecting bias, silence, fear, and then courage. Nathaniel Carter didn't raise his voice. He didn't throw a punch. He simply refused to surrender dignity, and because of that refusal, an entire airline and eventually an entire industry was forced to change. 3 months later, passengers boarded flights with less fear. Employees spoke up with more confidence. Other companies followed, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. That is the legacy of one man who stayed seated when told to stand. But this story isn't just about him. It's about all of us. About what happens when someone says, "You don't belong here," and we answer, "Yes, I do." About remembering that every act of respect or disrespect ripples far beyond the moment. So, as you leave this video, carry one truth with you. Dignity is not negotiable. Not in the skies, not on the ground, not anywhere. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because together, by telling these stories, we keep the fight for dignity alive.